And Tommy, you can go
Yep.
ahead and get us started.
All right, I will start off and let me share my screen here. And all right, everything good, Carrie?
Looks great, yes.
All right, it's always my fear that something's going wrong when we share the screen, regardless of we've been doing this for multiple years or not. So again, I'm going to focus here the first part of the presentation of the program on site selection more so than tree selection. Carrie's portion will get more into the detailed specifics of the various tree species we're offering in our tree sale and talk about some of the other stuff, but kind of the things to keep in mind when you're deciding where to plant the tree around your house. And part of that deals with trees, part of it deals with other things we'll get into. So again, title Planting for the Future. One of the things, I compare planting a tree to buying a house, maybe not quite the financial burden of buying a house, especially in today's market, but they're both long-term investments. And trees will outlive pretty much all of us. So when you're buying that tree, it may be small when you pick it up from our office, but it's going to be there a long time, assuming you plant it correctly and it's in the good spot and all that stuff. And that's kind of the mantra of real estate is location, location, location. So the same thing goes with planting trees, and we'll work our way through that and why that's important. So when we look at this, kind of on that long-term investment aspect of it, trees have variable growth rates and they're going to top out at variable max sizes. So, you may think, well, I'm 20 years old or I'm 80 years old. What's the growth rate of this tree? Am I going to see a return on that investment? And that's something to consider when you start picking out the tree, picking out where you're going to plant it, and going from there. And I can say with most of us, middle age and older, it's going to be an investment for our future generations more so than for ourselves. When it boils down to location, think about nearby structures, utility lines, other trees, things of that nature, things that the tree can affect. And then this next location, things with soil class, the drainage, the sunlight that reaches that site, those are things that are going to affect the tree itself. So affect how well that tree grows, the survival rate of it, all those things. And then the last thing is going to be kind of your personal well-being. What are the aesthetics like? Do you like where that tree is going to be? Don't just plant a tree someplace because it's good for the tree. You want it to be good for you as well. Trees are messy, some trees are, so consider that. And then a little bit on toxicity of trees. I'll get into that kind of on the last slide. Before I keep going, Carrie, I noticed like the images of our cameras are kind of blocking part of the screen. I know that you can adjust that on your own screen. So if it's kind of covering up some of the stuff on my slide, I didn't anticipate that when I designed the PowerPoint. So you should be able to move that around and hopefully not block part of the slide if you can't see it. So anyway, going on, one of the questions I get when it comes to our tree sale, especially maybe people that have a small yard or a yard that already has plenty of trees or landscaping around it, maybe you only have room for one tree, and is that single tree beneficial? If you can only plant one tree, is that still beneficial? Should you still spend the time and effort to do that? Short answer is yes. There are many benefits of trees, and we can go into that on a different day, but a single tree is beneficial. If that's all you can find a spot for in your yard, that's great. We offer single sapling trees in our sale, or you can go buy one at someplace else. But if you're restricted to just a single tree, go for it. We're not asking you to plant 50 trees out there and build a small forest. A single tree can be beneficial. And when we talk about the growth rate and that long-term investment, there's a handful of inspirational quotes out there you can find. I found this one: the true meaning of life is to plant trees under whose shade you do not expect to sit. So again, for us on the downward curve of our life, those trees are going to take a long time to grow, or some of them might. So we may not get to enjoy the fruits of our labor, so to speak, but our kids, our grandkids, our great grandchildren, we'll be able to do that, and that's kind of what the whole meaning of planting a tree is. But also, this is about practical site selection. So there's this quote: "A person can demonstrate their consideration when they plant a tree whose problems someone else won't have to face." And that's me. I said that. So that's my quote. And if you look at that picture, there's a lot going on. If you think about someone that planted that tree, that pine tree might be 20 years old in this picture. It's going to be there for another 60 years, and you might not be that homeowner in 60 years. And there's a lot of issues that tree may create. So when you're thinking about where to plant a tree, consider the future owners of that property as well, and what problems that tree might create for them down the road. All right, so when we talk about trees, we use just some generic terms when you're describing how big that max size of the tree can be. And in kind of the basic small layer, if you look at the chart here, are shrubs. And they don't list species on this chart, but that would be things like the Arrowwood Viburnum that's featured in our tree sale, or spice bush, something along those lines. Very small, usually in that 4 to 8 foot max height range. Very suitable for planting up next to a house. They're never going to become large enough where they obstruct vision or become a physical danger to the house. And then kind of as you move down the road, you got small trees, which dogwood and redbud are kind of the two most popular within that line, medium size, and then all the way up to large. And kind of at the far right of that spectrum, the ponderosa pine and redwood are not two we're going to encounter in Ohio, at least at maximum size. But the plane tree, that's another name for sycamore. So sycamores belong to the plane tree family, and those are a tree that's very common here in central Ohio, and they can get tremendously large. So just something to consider when you're deciding where to plant that. What's that top end of my tree going to be? And trees are like fish in a way, where they never truly stop growing. As long as that tree's alive, it's going to be growing. But they also have a kind of a genetic maximum size built in. So that dogwood may be 200 years old, doesn't mean it's going to be 200 feet tall. Dogwoods are going to top out at that 15 to 20 foot range. Normally, I do know of one that's like 50 feet tall down in Athens County that I believe is the state champion for flowering dogwood, but that's an anomaly and definitely not the normal size. So when picking that site, kind of know what that tree is going to top out at. And then another thing to consider is, what's the shape of that tree going to be as it gets mature? Because when you buy them in a seedling stage, when they're 12 inches tall or 18 inches tall, whatever they may be, if you pick them up from our tree sale, all those trees are basically the same size and shape. That they're restricted by their size, but as they mature, they're going to grow into one of these shapes that this illustration here does a really good job on. And when I was a kid growing up, I thought deciduous trees were all one shape and conifers were all another. And you look at this and you can see everything from the upper right there, that pyramidal shape of your traditional Norway spruce or white pines, but then you've got the conical shape of maybe a American red cedar or arborvitae. So they're a lot narrower at the base. They still maintain that triangular shape, but they're much narrower. So when you're picking that site, anticipate that shape that they're going to be when they get older, and what the branches may spread out into, what they may interfere with around them. And I laughed because I saw the picture there in the bottom right, the irregular shape. And for anyone who's ever planted or grown a redbud trees, I've never seen any two alike. Those things grow in the most unexpected fashion. They're a small tree, thankfully, so they don't get out of control. But I planted two in my front yard, and they look nothing alike. If you didn't know that they were both redbuds, they don't look like they're the same species. So they are definitely in that irregular category. When it comes to growth rates, again, we're not using technical terms here. They're either slow, medium, or fast. And I'm going to put up a chart here in a couple slides, and Carrie's going to share a link to that later, and both of us are going to refer to that. But then I'll point that out when I get there. But it does a really good job on that chart of listing these growth rates based on the tree species. So it's not something you have to memorize. I just use these three is kind of typical examples that most people are familiar with. And I use the dogwood for slow growth because a lot of people may assume that a small tree grows faster than a large tree. Think of the oaks that are slow growing trees, or hickories, but dogwoods, incredibly slow growing tree, even though they're that small tree. Sugar maples are a very popular one. They're in that medium range. And then again, the sycamore, very fast grower, can also get very large. Redbuds would be that fast growing tree, but they stay small. So just know that trees can come in all sizes and all growth rates, but we're not getting into specifics like inches per year or feet per year in some cases. We're just going to leave it at slow, medium, and fast. So just kind of understand what that tree is going to do. And again, that may sway your decision on what type of tree to get, if you want something to grow fast and fill a hole in your yard, or something that you're fine with taking a couple decades to get to any appreciable size. So here's that chart. I guess it was on the next slide, but I'll use my pointer here to demonstrate. But the species list down the left. Here's our mature heights, or that max size. Mature spread, again, it doesn't give you the shape per se, but at least it tells you about how far those branches typically spread. Those may be close to the ground in the case of evergreens, or they may be up the canopy level of the tree in some deciduous, but it kind of gives you an idea how much space you need to allow for that tree to grow. That growth rate, again, we got, again, slow to medium, medium, fast, all the places in between. And then some of the other stuff this chart goes into, we're not going to hit on too much here tonight. One I will get into is the soil moisture requirements of trees. And just know that we're going to provide links to this chart. And if you're unable to click them or you lose them, feel free to call Carrie and I. We both have this document saved on our computers. We can email it to you or point you in that direction. But it's a wonderful resource that lists just about every native landscape style tree that you would find here in Ohio. So just something that the Ohio Division of Forestry put out there that's a really good resource. So again, now that you've picked out your tree, or the trees that you think you want, comes down to where are you going to put in your yard. And your Georgia the jungle here, watch out for that tree. Think about the activities you're going to be doing around your yard, other structures around your yard that may influence or be influenced by that tree. Something as simple as mowing. If you plant a tree too close to a building and you can't get the mower through there, well, now you're out there weed eating or hand pruning or doing other things. So just some of the different considerations. Here's one that, if I was speaking to a live audience and not looking at a computer screen, everybody'd start nodding their heads. This is one we see all over the place. People planting trees under power lines. The tree's going to get big. In the case of something like this maple or elms or these traditional trees you see a lot around urban roads, those power lines go right through that. You end up with this weird shape where the power company comes in, sends their tree crews in, prunes those lines back. One, it's not good for the tree. Two, it looks really silly. And then also the power company are spending all the money to trim these regularly. That's going to affect your electricity bill. They're going to add that to your bill somehow. So please don't plant a tree under a utility line, whether it's electric or cable or phone or what have you, unless it's going to top out at about 8 feet. And even then, I would say stay away from the utility lines. And in case you were in a cave this past weekend when the ice storm hit, we had a lot of this scene all around the county, and especially in southeastern Ohio, trees falling on power lines. So even if you're not planting directly under a utility line, know that if that tree gets 30, 40, 50 feet tall and it's adjacent to a power line, it could come down in a storm and still take out those lines. So that's another thing. If you have the room to offset that tree enough that even at max height, if it falls down, it's not going to take out a utility line. So all this comes into play, and maybe you're dealing with 10 acres out in the country and you have the luxury of being able to plant these way away from anything. you may be in a urban or city lot and not have a choice, but try your best to situate the trees to where they're not going to interfere with public infrastructure like this. Two other cases that we run into a lot is this is your, the fence structure here. And I looked at this picture and I'm wondering which was there first, the tree or the fence. And in this case, I'm going to guess they put the fence in after the tree was already there, but the tree was much smaller at the time. And trees not only grow up, but they also grow out. And in this case, it grew out and it is now swallowing the fence, as well as pushing it and deforming it. So again, keep that in mind. Property boundaries, fences, walls, retaining walls, things like that. Understand that that tree is going to grow over time and not going to stay in its neat little pocket that you planted initially. And then picture on the right, I included this because this is another one we see a lot more in urban environments and towns that have those built-in sidewalks. And then there's that little space between the curb and the sidewalk, and people love to plant trees in there. And then a couple problems occur. If it never falls over, you still may end up with problems. And I'll highlight two of them. And one, kind of, if you look at that, the red line there by the root ball, those roots should grow outward equal to the branch dimensions above it. So if you think of the canopy of the tree, the branches that are spreading out, those roots are normally spreading out equal to or greater than those branches. And that's, for multiple reasons: to add stability to the tree, to absorb water from the ground, to get rain. That outer level of the branches we call the drip line, and that's a prime area for the roots to absorb water. Well, in this case, that road and that curb have cut those roots off, and you can see the roots are in a nice straight line. So, it's handicapping the tree and its ability to get water from the soil. And it also, in this case, lacked the structural support, and wind or whatever, in this case, blew that tree over, and there were just no roots on that side to hold it in place. So it weakens the structure of that tree. And then the other thing is kind of a more practical thing. Those roots are also expanding under the sidewalk. And as roots grow, they grow in diameter, they're going to displace that soil, heave the sidewalk. If you've walked around any town or any city, you've probably tripped over one of these joints in the sidewalk. The tree roots have made that sidewalk heave up. And depending on the city or the municipality that you're in, they may make you repair that sidewalk damage that your tree causes on your own dime. So you're going to have to hire somebody to take out that concrete and replace it to keep the sidewalk level. And of course, that usually involves cutting the tree down, because if you don't, it's just going to continue to happen. So all your investment in that tree is going to be lost. Plus now your wallet's lighter because you've had to fix the town sidewalk. So I just try to advise keeping larger trees out of that area. Again, small shrubs, things without an extensive root system are probably okay. Just know that you're going to have to prune those back so people don't get poked in the eye with sticks as they're walking down the sidewalk. All right, this picture, I'm not sure what was going on in this picture. I don't advise it. I assume that house and the tree were both built, or the house was built and the tree was planted at around the same time. But that's just a headache waiting to happen. In a couple of years, you might not be able to get in the front door of that house if it grows much wider. So I don't advise planting any trees right up against your foundation, regardless of size, but this is kind of a worst case scenario. And then on a similar note, planting large trees near or adjacent to your house, there's always the potential, if it topples over, it could come crashing through your roof and into your living room. So again, if you have the luxury of spacing those trees out, keep the larger trees a distance enough from your house where if they do happen to fall, in a worst case scenario, they don't cause damage. Again, not a viable thing in some cases, but just if you can be safe, go that route. Just last couple things, no pictures with these, but especially if you live in a rural lot or out in the country and you have an on-site septic system and you have a leach bed or leach field in your yard, know where that is. Don't plant trees in your leach bed or leach field. The roots could crush or clog your leach lines, and a sewer backup is not something that you want to have happen. especially if it can be prevented by just keeping the trees out of that area. I talked about the overhead utility lines. Same thing goes with buried utility lines. If something happens to those utility lines and they have to be serviced, the company's going to come in, they're going to rip up your tree. And I'll use this time to also mention that regardless of where you're planting your trees, it's always recommended to call OOPS, the Ohio Utilities Protection Service. Even if you think you're only digging down 8 or 10 inches to plant those roots, it never hurts to call 811, have them come out, locate those lines so you don't accidentally drive a shovel or a dibble bar or a post hole digger into an electric line, or heaven forbid, like a fiber optic line, and you're out thousands and thousands of dollars to repair it. And then same thing with easements, and that's probably more so in like HOA subdivision neighborhoods. They may have access easements or flood routing easements that go through your property. Your deed should list those. They might not be marked on your property or might not be well known, especially if you're buying the house after it was built. But just be aware of those, be aware of where those are, so you don't plant a tree that then gets ripped out down the road because someone needs to access something and they have a legal easement to do so. So just some of the things to keep in mind. When it comes to the soils and drainage, so again, these are the things now that are going to affect your tree. Some of the things to consider with soils: what's the moisture holding ability? What's the pH? I'm not going to get into pH in my presentation, but just know that if you've picked out a site you want to plant a tree, you can do soil testing through your office of OSU Extension. If you're here in Fairfield County, you'd come to the the Ag Center here in Lancaster. If you're joining us from an adjacent county, your county will have an extension office somewhere. Visit them. They can provide you with, the instructions on how to take a good soil sample, and then they'll send that off to a lab for you for a fee to be analyzed. But one of the things I will use, and I'll have a couple slides here highlighting it, is the Web Soil Survey, and that's an online database provided by the United States Department of Agriculture, to where you can get soil maps of your property, and I'll show you kind of some of the information you can pull from that. And then I thought I'd mention the depth to bedrock, especially if you're joining us from Lancaster. On the east side of Lancaster, there's a lot of bedrock up near the surface in a lot of these urban yards. So you live in the city, you may only have 8 or 10 inches of soil before you dig down and hit bedrock. Now, if you're northern Fairfield County, western Fairfield County, where I live, where the glaciers came through, we've got soil for days and it's not an issue. But depending on where you live, that bedrock may be very shallow and may affect what you can plant and what that soil type is. And then regarding drainage, do you have areas of your yard that hold water after it rains? A day or two later, do you have a soggy area in your yard that it ponds that water? Understand that some trees are going to thrive in that environment. Some trees need that water to go away very quickly following a rainstorm, or else it'll actually drown them out. And then surface flow patterns. In a hard rain, do you have areas of your yard that water flows across the surface? Similar to that, you want those trees to be inundated with that water, but also know that maybe planting a tree in that area in the future may block that flow of water and create issues. You may get water backed up into your house or flood your neighbor out, some of those things. So it might be wise to not plant trees in those areas. So here's the Web Soil Survey. I'm going to provide a link at the end, but you can also find it just by going on Google or your search engine of choice, typing in Web Soil Survey. It'll take you to this site. This is the home page, and the big green button there. Click on that, and that will take you into the process of creating a soil map for wherever you want. And it pops up a map kind of like Google Earth or Google Maps, and you can zoom in. In this case, I zoomed into my yard. I'll use my yard as an example here. I drew the boundaries. I just created a shape around the property lines of my yard. Hit create a soil map, and this is what it looks like. And it's got these little abbreviations, the soil units, and then over here on the left tells us what the names of those soils are, how much of my property is made up of those soils. And if we look at this Bennington, makes up over half of my yard. So if we click on it, it brings up this huge amount of information on this soil. Fantastic if you're really into soil or really a soil enthusiast. But there's also just one of the things I wanted to point out. That's a lot of overwhelming information, but right here it says drainage class, somewhat poorly drained. And if you refer back to that tree chart by the Ohio Division of Forestry, it lists what drainage class soil that those trees prefer. So you can look in your yard, draw that soil map and know, all right, maybe some of those trees are automatically out because my soil is just not conducive to those. So by using this web soil survey, you can find that information that otherwise people are like, how am I going to know if my soil is well drained or not? Now, I will say, if you live in town, especially in a larger, older city like Lancaster, that soil has been completely disturbed and the web soil survey does not apply to those areas. It'll just tell you I forget what the term is. I think it's a U for undefined, because there's been so much disturbance that soil has none of its original properties left. So this works better if you're out in the country or a rural lot. Not to say it's completely worthless if you're in the city, but just know that it does have limitations. Another thing to look at, again, we'll go back to my yard. This is just an image I pulled off of Google Earth. I had to go back several years. I think this was about 15 years ago to find a good image. But this shows a really good example of where the water goes in my yard just by looking at the color from this picture. So the dark green areas are areas that lay wet for a very long time after it rains. The kind of the yellowish areas are pretty well drained soil. And then the tan areas are going to be those areas that stay dry. So that soil either didn't get wet or the water ran off of it, or it just gets dry very quickly. And to kind of give you an idea, here's what I would consider wet or poorly drained soils. That is dry soils, and then everything else would be considered well drained. So again, that tree chart's going to tell you that. You can look, probably have to go back a couple years to maybe find the good image of your property. But if you don't know just by living there and walking your property what areas stay wet or not, it's just another tool to have to kind of decide where to plant the trees as far as planning goes. And you don't need to be a landscape architect to figure that out. Just know that, all right, some areas of my yard are going to be off limits for certain trees. And then kind of to finish up here with aesthetics, easy for me to say, messy trees and toxic trees, just kind of to wrap up my part of the presentation here. When it comes to aesthetics, I leave that completely up to you. I'm not one to say you should always plant this tree here or that tree there. You're going to know where you want that tree to be. If it's a tree that has pretty flowers in the spring, maybe you want to be able to look at it out your picture window. In this, I use this picture. It's from my mom's front porch. I stopped there one night and there was this gorgeous sunset. And of course, I'm not there very often in the evenings, but she told me, she's like, man, the sunsets are like this more often than not. So this might be a place where you don't want to plant a tree. Maybe that's a view that you want to keep open. So again, aesthetics come into play on where to plant the tree, and sometimes it involves not planting a tree in a certain place. And again, likewise, making a mess of things. Use these two examples. A lot of trees will produce some type of fruit. Now, not necessarily a fruit like an apple or this hedge apple on the right, but fruit could be the seed pods of the honey locust tree on the left. One of the big ones that gets a lot of complaints are sweet gum trees that have those seed pods that look like a mace. So they're spiky balls about the size of a golf ball, and it produces them by the hundreds. People were stepping on them in their yard, slipping on them. If you walk in your yard barefooted, might not be a tree that you want to plant in those high traffic areas. And likewise with some of these. So know what that tree is going to produce as far as fruit, as far as leaves go. Maybe you don't want to rake a bunch of leaves from your front yard every year. So certain trees produce big leaves. Other trees produce little leaves that'll blow away or decompose very rapidly. So know what that what kind of mess that tree can make, and that may influence where you put it as well. Use the hedge apple as an example. Plant that out in your front yard by your sidewalk, and some kids walking down the sidewalk gets bonked on the head by a hedge apple falling out of your tree. They might not be too happy, or their parents might not be too happy with you. And the last thing you need is a lawsuit because your tree dropped fruit on somebody. So just, consider that when planting it. And then the last thing, kind of toxic neighbors. And I say that in relation to trees, not Ed and Becky that live next door. And it brings me to a vocabulary lesson. And this is the last slide, so we'll get you out of here. But kind of the word of the day. And I put the pronunciation key up there because after reading it, I wondered if I'd been pronouncing this wrong my whole life. I pronounce it allelopathy, but if you're an English major and you can read that pronunciation chart and say that I'm butchering that, please let me know. But for now, I'm going to stick with allelopathy. And there's the textbook definition, but basically some plants produce a toxin in their roots, in their leaves, in their fruit that can restrict the growth of other plants around it or even kill other plants around it. And there are a handful of trees and plants that do this. The most common one that we're going to run into as far as a desired tree would be black walnut. So black walnut produces this toxin that they've named juglone because black walnuts are in the juglans genus. But this toxin is present in all parts of the tree. So when the leaves fall in the autumn, this toxin will enter the soil. The roots produce this toxin and admit it into the soil around the roots. And then the walnuts themselves, that green outer husk that gets all brown and nasty and can stain your hands, it produces this toxin too. And it will greatly restrict what other plants can grow around it. So when I was doing the research, I found that tomatoes and peppers and other plants in that nightshade family are very affected by this. So don't plant black walnuts next to your garden if you want to grow tomatoes, because this toxin in those trees will restrict that to some effect. And a couple other ones that do this that hopefully no one's planting intentionally, but ailanthus trees, which tree of heaven is another name for those, bush honeysuckles, and the plant garlic mustard are all plants that produce these allelopathic toxins, which is part of the reason why they can spread so rapidly, because they kill the other plants around them and eliminate the competition. So just know that when you're choosing a tree, understand that some of them are toxic to other plants around it. So that may affect, again, where you plant it. And I look for any excuse, throw this photo in. Just a reminder that the seedlings we're planting today will be tomorrow's giants, giant being a relative term if you're planting a dogwood or redbud. But in this case, picture on the left is me and a coworker of mine. This is a giant sycamore tree that's growing in the Powell area, north of Columbus, along the Olentangy River. It was when I worked for Franklin County Metro Parks. And to give you an idea of my coworker, he is 6'4". So that tree is incredibly huge. And at one point, it was the reigning national champion, largest American sycamore in the United States. I think another one in Ohio has actually surpassed that now, but that tree is tremendous, and it's in a metro park, High Banks Metro Park. If you ever get a chance to get up there and see this tree, it's quite impressive. So here's, this is my last slide, just the links. I don't expect you to copy that whole link down, but if you wanted to take a screenshot of it or take out your phone and take a picture. Otherwise, we're recording this. It'll be available. Carrie's going to put this up on YouTube, and you can come back to this. And again, my contact information's down there at the bottom. If you don't want to write down the links, you can call me or email me, and I'll just send it to you, or tell you how to get there over the phone. I have no problem talking you through any of this stuff. I will say the web soil survey is a little complicated the first time you do it. So if you get on there and you're struggling to figure out how it works, give me a call and I can walk you through it step by step on the phone. So I have no problem doing that. So with that, I will stop sharing and turn it over to Carrie for your portion.
All right. So Tommy did a great job of talking about the site conditions. Now we're going to kind of flip-flop and look at the preferred site conditions of the trees. So you can kind of cross-reference that information and figure out the best trees for your site. And we're going to, of course, highlight the trees that are available in the Soil and Water annual tree sale this year. So first, I summarize all of the trees that are available based on, and they're organized based on the type of drainage that they require. So these 3 species all are able to thrive in areas that are poorly drained. That doesn't necessarily mean areas that have standing water all the time, but areas that have this kind of like clay soils where you might have standing water for a time after a hard rain. These 3 species wouldn't mind so much. So I have the species, the tree type, whether that's a large tree, medium tree, small tree, or shrub, and that mature height and mature spread. Those are kind of maximum under optimum conditions. So, you know, your Bur Oak may not necessarily ever reach 90 feet, but it kind of gives you an idea of what you're dealing with. And, you know, you're going to see slightly different numbers, you know, based on where you look, but it gives you an idea of how big of a tree you can one day expect. And then we also indicated the growth rate of each of those species as well. The asterisk that I have there indicates that they're adaptable to other soil types. So these 3 species, while they can thrive in poorly drained soils, they're also okay in drier conditions as well. So if you have a site that's not poorly drained, it's a drier site, you could still plant a Bur Oak and it's going to do just fine for you because it's very adaptable to different sites. And finally, the highlights are the ones that we're going to do a deeper dive in after a while. So we're going to take a closer look at Bur Oak in just a bit. After this presentation, we will email out PDFs of these slides, and each of these, there we go, each of the species here that's underlined, those are all separate links. So I linked information on each of the species from a reputable site. Most of it is information from ODNR, so that if you you know, want to do a deep dive yourself on elderberry, then you have a good resource to be able to do so. Next is moderately well drained. So these 4 species like good drainage, but it doesn't necessarily have to be a real dry location. You know, we talked about the red bud being a small tree / shrub. Really, it's a multi-stemmed tree, and we're going to take a closer look at red bud, along with persimmon and Kentucky coffee tree. Those are 2 pretty cool species that I'm pretty excited are for sale this year. And then shagbark hickory as well. So Kentucky coffee tree and shagbark hickory, those are very large trees. You're going to want to prepare for a very large tree, depending on where you plant it. You're not going to want to put it right next to a foundation, whereas a red bud could probably be a little bit closer to the house and be okay. These 4 species are also best suited for moderately well drained. We'll take a deeper dive on the Arrowwood Viburnum, a pretty cool shrub that is for sale this year. And we're not going to spend a lot of time talking about sugar maple, but OSU Extension is holding a maple syrup series, and we're going to take a closer look at different maple species, including sugar maple, and I'll talk about that a little bit more at the end of the presentation. So if you're interested in learning more about sugar maple, that'll be a good opportunity for that. And then there's also northern pecan and white pine. And then finally, these 2 species do best in a well-drained, drier area: white oak and eastern red cedar. Next to white pine, eastern red cedar is the other evergreen that is for sale. This is a shrub. It's commonly seen kind of dividing properties. And then of course, white oak is a very large tree, and we will take a closer look at that one. All right, so after hearing Tommy's presentation, you should have a better idea of your own site and some of the things that you need to keep in mind when selecting a tree species that fits your site. So we're going to take a closer look at 6 tree species and the considerations that should be made when you're planting each of them. And the first one that we're going to look at is Arrowwood Viburnum. And this is the smallest of the species that's for sale. And we're going to kind of work our way up. So this shrub prefers moderately well-drained soils. It can grow to a height of 10 feet and a spread of 15 feet. So it's going to be wider than it is higher. It's a native shrub, and it gets its common name from its usage as for shafts that Native Americans would set their spears and arrowheads on. It does have other common names, including southern arrowwood. It has these beautiful flowers. It's actually the last native viburnum to bloom in the mid to late spring. And the flowers form this really attractive blue berries that, of course, wildlife just love. And those blueberries will persist into the fall, and it has nice fall color as well. So it continues to put a show on for you even into the fall. So considerations to be made if you're considering Arrowwood Viburnum for your site. While it prefers well-drained soils, it's very, very tolerable of soils that are not as well-drained. So some of the poor rocky clay soils that developed areas may have, it's going to be able to thrive in that. It may not grow as quickly as it would in ideal conditions, but it's going to be okay. It tolerates the heat of summer and the cold of winter extremely well. It'll thrive in full sun to partial shade. It's virtually disease and pest free. It's very beneficial to pollinators. Pollinators love the flowers, and birds love the berries. So you're a friend to the animals, to the animal kingdom if you're planting this shrub. The one thing about this shrub is it does require some maintenance if you have a restricted space. It's widely has a widely arching growth habit, and it sends up an abundance of basal suckers as it ages. And those basal suckers come from the root system. They can be controlled easily by pruning, or if you have it located correctly, you may be even just be able to mow over them as you mow your lawn. So you can keep it under control, but it does require a little bit of maintenance in that way. One other thing to note is that most native viburnums are pretty self-incompatible and typically require cross-pollination from 2 genetically different plants in order to produce fruit. So that's something to keep in mind. If you're really wanting those beautiful blueberries, then think about the fact that there needs to be 2 plants in order to do that. And maybe your neighbor has one already, and that'll solve your problem for you. Or it could help you make your decision as of when you're trying to figure out how many of these to purchase. So our next one up is kind of the beauty queen of the group. This is the Eastern Redbud. It's a small tree. It's often multi-stemmed. It can reach heights of 25 feet with a 25-foot spread. It has these gorgeous flowers that emerge before the leaves. So it really puts on a show because there's no leaves to block the flowers. It's just flowers. And those flowers emerge on old wood, which is unusual. It's not most species flower on new wood, but it's just a really good looking plant. Gets these beautiful heart-shaped leaves, and those flowers will eventually turn into these green pods that will ripen into dark pods, and sometimes, depending on the year and depending on how much the the tree flowered, it can be loaded with these pods in the late fall. It's a member of the legume family, along with things like honey locust, Kentucky coffee tree, and black locust. And it tends to grow faster in full sun and when it's young. So those first couple of years, it'll shoot up and then it'll start to slow down a little bit. Now, if you would like to add this to your landscape, some things to keep in mind. It does prefer well-drained soils. It's not going to be as tolerable as the viburnum is going to be. It's not going to like those clay soils quite as much, and we'll talk about in a moment, but those clay soils can cause problems later in the life of this tree. It grows most rapidly, like I said, in full sun, and if it has adequate moisture. It's very beneficial to native bees. So these flowers are visited by many different pollinators, but long-tongued native bees are the only ones that can actually reach the nectaries. And also, due to the thin, papery nature of those heart-shaped leaves, female leafcutter bees will actually use their mandibles to snip small discs from the leaf edges. They'll collect those fragments. They'll roll them up kind of like a cigar, and will construct individual cells within their nest with those rolled up leaves. And each cell, they lay an egg, along with a ball of pollen and nectar. And that's where that offspring hatches and gets the start of its life. It doesn't damage the tree itself. It's really just a minor curiosity, but it's pretty neat to know that you're supporting wildlife in some interesting ways. So if you've ever seen a red bud that looks like somebody took a paper, like a hole puncher to it, that's what you're seeing is the effects of those leafcutter bees. It grows rapidly, but it's short-lived, especially in those poor drained, heavy soils. There is a disease called trunk canker. It's a really serious disease. It's a fungal disease that, once it's hit the tree, it's really hard to get rid of. Vercillium, wilt, and root rot as well. And all of these are going to result from soil that's not well drained enough. So if you do plant this in an area and all you have is really clayey soils, just know that you may get 20 years out of it, but because of where it's planted, it's going to be a little bit more susceptible to disease. Not that it's going to get those diseases right away. It typically hits the plant and later in its life, but it's just something to keep in mind. So persimmon is the next one up. This is a medium-sized tree. It can grow to heights of 50 feet with a 30-foot spread, and it tends to be a slow grower. It has this really cool, chunky bark that kind of changes how it looks throughout its lifespan. It is one of our native fruit trees here in the state of Ohio, and it's actually separate sexed. So there are separate male trees and separate female trees. So the male trees have male flowers, which is what you're seeing here, these kind of cute little bell-shaped flowers. And in a female tree, those flowers would mature to a fruit. And then when they ripe, they're about the size of a plum, and they have this pretty orangish color. They're going to ripen in mid to late fall, or really even into winter. And this is a tree that's already shed its leaves, and you can see that it's just loaded with fruit. So it's one of our larger native fruits, besides the pawpaw, which is unfortunately not a selection this year. But this is still a really cool plant. It'll begin to produce fruit in 4 to 9 years. And if you've ever tried to eat a persimmon before it was fully ripened, you likely won't forget the experience. I remember my first time. It's very astringent. It sucks all the moisture out of your mouth just like that. It's overly unpleasant. But if you wait for it to ripen, it's very delicious. It has a very I think kind of an apricot-like flavor. It's kind of a myth that a hard frost is required to sweeten the fruit. In actuality, it just takes persimmons a really long time to ripen. And they don't all ripen at the same time. And that edible fruit will oftentimes hang on the trees into fall and even into winter, and it's unaffected by those freezing temperatures. You do have to beat the wildlife to it, though, because they like it as well. So things to consider if you want to plant a persimmon. It's very adaptable to a lot of different soil types and moisture levels, various pHs. Basically, it'll grow in pretty much anywhere. But you need to keep in mind the size of it also. So you're not going to want to plant this right next to your house. But more than likely you have a site that could support this tree. It can potentially have root suckers like that viburnum that would form colonies, but those can be controlled through pruning. In order to get fruit, you need a male and a female. So just like all other species in this world, well, not all other species, most species, you do need a male and a female tree. And unfortunately, you're not going to be able to tell if you have a male or a female until it starts flowering, which can take a few years. So plant a few of them. That's what I did. I purchased some of these from the tree sale a couple of years ago, and I planted a few of them. They aren't flowering yet, maybe this year, but that's just the way it is. It has very few pests and diseases, and we talked about it. It's a great source of food for wildlife and for humans. All right, next up is Kentucky coffee tree. This is a really cool tree, and I was super excited to see that this was one of the selections this year. This is a picture of a Kentucky coffee tree at the Dall's Arboretum. As you can see, during the growing season, it has a real kind of soft, leafy texture. I just think it's kind of unique, a little bit like something out of Dr. Seuss. It is a legume, so it's going to develop pods like the redbud, and it is separate sexed like the persimmon that we were talking about. So if you don't want to deal with the pods, then hopefully you end up with a male and you won't have to deal with the pods, because the pods are only going to be on the female. And as you can see, it's just as beautiful in the winter. It kind of looks like something out of a Halloween movie, I think, but it has just kind of these bold limbs, and it's just a real looker that I don't think we see enough of. So I'm planning on plugging a few on my property this year. So the Kentucky coffee tree will grow in a lot of different conditions. It doesn't like permanently wet soil, so don't plant it in a swampy area. It's not going to do well for you. But in a lot of other areas, it'll do just fine. It's very tolerant of lots of different stresses. It can withstand some occasional flooding, just not those areas that are going to stay saturated. Make sure that you plant it in an area that's large enough for it. Not only is this a tree that needs the space for its root system, but this is a tree where I think its true beauty is its canopy. So in order to be able to really appreciate the beauty that it can provide, make sure that it has the space that it needs in order to grow. Like before, it has separate male and female trees. Only the females will produce the fruit, but a male is required for fertilization. And like I said, folks tend to prefer males because then you don't have the cleanup of the fallen pods and seeds. And this also has no significant disease or pest problems. All right, so we're going to cover two more trees. The king of trees, oaks. I'm a big oak person. Oaks are fantastic. They support more organisms on this earth than any tree, especially any tree you're going to find around here. And there are two oaks for sale in tree sale this year, and they both require different soil types, which is really good because more than likely you can find one that's going to work for you if you have the space for it. So Bur Oak is a very slow growing tree. It can get up to 90 feet tall with an 80-foot spread if given the space. It's growing in open. It is arguably one of the most picturesque of the oaks. Has these really cool fiddle-shaped, leathery leaves, and these huge fringed acorns. And the bark you can see is kind of corky here. You're not always going to see that, but it kind of adds some texture. And it's a very large tree. So you can see it has a massive trunk all the way up to a massive canopy. So you need to make sure that you have the space that you need for this oak. Out of the two oaks, this is the species that's going to be able to adapt to areas that are wet. It's not going to grow in a swamp, but it will grow in areas that stay pretty wet. But it can also withstand dry areas as well. So it's pretty adaptable. It makes for an excellent choice for parks and any areas with wide spaces. It doesn't mind too much what your pH level is. It's very cold tolerant. Like we said, it needs space. It is going to live for a while. It's subject to the usual array of pests and pathogens that can affect many oaks. The one that you probably have heard about perhaps is oak wilt. This is a very serious and often deadly vascular disease. Oaks that are in the white oak group, which this actually falls in the white oak group, are less susceptible to it and more tolerant. So that's a good thing. It's still not very common, but it's just something to kind of be aware about. And it has, like all oak species, it has so many benefits to wildlife. Those acorns are eaten by many birds and mammals. You name it, and if it's in the woods, it's eating the acorns. They're dispersed by rodents and blue jays. Blue jays are actually their number one disperser, and its leaves can be browsed by things like deer and cattle. And red-tailed hawks, screech owls, fox squirrels, and flying squirrels will nest in it. So it provides food, it provides habitat. Really cool tree. And then the last one we're going to cover is the white oak. So this is a beautiful tree also. You can see the back of the leaf and where it gets its name of white oak. It has this really pretty, like light gray bark. This is also a very large tree. It can get up to 80 feet tall with a spread of 100 feet. Has a medium to slow growth rate. The acorns look quite different from the bur oak. They're really, the caps of the acorns are really knobby, so they don't have that fringe to them. Has some fall color to it. You know, not as great as a sugar maple, but still it has kind of a reddish, sometimes yellowish tinges to the leaves in the fall. And we have a local celebrity. This is the Logan's Great White Oak. So this tree is in Logan, Ohio. It is estimated to be 500 to 600 years old, which means that it was at least a century old when the Mayflower reached America in 1620, which blows my mind every time I think about it. And how cool is that? So if you're looking for a day trip, you should go check this tree out. It's in a cemetery in Logan. When you get the PDF of this PowerPoint, this is actually a link to an article that was written by Jim McCormick that indicates the location of this. So it tells you exactly where to go in Logan. This is myself just lounging under the tree, and it kind of feels a little magical when you're there, and I think you'll agree when you visit. Any time of year, it's gorgeous. It's really something to write home about. Outside of that, the white oak is one of the most important timber trees in Ohio, or within North America. It's been used for lumber, for beams, railroad ties. I know at home, my house was built in the 50s, and all of our floors are made out of white oak. If you like whiskey, your whiskey barrels are made out of white oak, furniture, and just so many other uses. So very important tree. If you want to plant a white oak, it's going to be a little pickier about soil and drainage than the bur oak. So it's going to need an area that is going to have a little bit better drainage. So it's not going to tolerate those permanently moist soils. Like we said, it's a very important lumber tree. Like the bur oak, it needs space. It's going to live a while, maybe 500 to 600 years if you're lucky. It offers many benefits to wildlife. So we talked about how important the acorns are and how it provides habitat. But if any of you are familiar with Doug Tallamy, he has written a couple different books on the benefits of native plants to the ecosystem, to the food chain. And oaks are host to over 500 different species of moths and butterfly caterpillars, more than any other native genus. And that provides a huge boost to biodiversity, because more than 90% of our songbirds depend on caterpillars in order to rear their young. So it's, definitely, there's just so many ways that these oaks help to support wildlife. All right, so now we're going to get into planting bare root seedling. So some guidelines to kind of keep in mind. When you pick up your tree, make sure that you keep those roots moist. Don't let them dry out. If you can't plant it right away, keep it in a cool location, not in a freezer. You don't want to freeze it, and not in a garage that isn't insulated if you're below freezing temperatures. But keep it cool. I know last year I kept mine in our extra garage, our extra refrigerator that we have in our basement, and just turned it up as warm as the refrigerator would go. So keep it cool, keep it moist. If you're not going to plant it right away, you can always heel it in. And that just means if you don't know the permanent location yet, dig a trench, plant the tree in it, make sure that the roots are in the soil, and you're just kind of tiding it over there until you give it its permanent home. When you're planting, ensure the roots are straight up and down. So you don't want to plant it with the roots twisted. Pay attention to J roots. So you don't want roots that are in the shape of a J. You may have to prune your roots. Pruning roots is something that you can do if you need to do it. It's recommended that you never remove more than 25% of the root system. And if you're dealing with a taproot, you don't want to cut off the whole taproot, but you can, if you have that J and it just won't straighten out for you, you can give it a little bit of a trim so that it's growing straight down. Protect it from browse. So whether that's using a tree tube, I know Soil and Water has tree tubes in their tree sale this year. You can purchase them from other places. You can use fencing, but make sure that you're protecting it from browse of deer, rabbits, in your neighborhood, how much of a problem this is. In that first year of its life, you want to make sure that you keep it watered. That's really critical, especially if we have a dry summer and there's not a lot of rain. Make sure that you're giving it the water that it needs. All right, I'm going to share another screen. There's a short, like 1.5 minute video that I want to share with you on planting a bare root. This is from the Arbor Day Foundation. Originally, Tommy and I were going to make our own video, but with these frigid temperatures, we weren't able to get a shovel in the soil. So we decided to go this route instead. Oh, try one more time here, sorry. All right, here we go. All right. So that gives you a little bit of an idea of what you should be doing once you get that bare root. Some of the important things there, make sure that you're digging a hole that is wider and deeper than you think you need, especially wider. And when you plant that tree, make sure that you're planting it at what is called the root collar. So it's where it would normally meet the ground. And when you pick up your trees, Soil and Water provides a really nice brochure that shows you exactly how to do that. So that's something that you'll get if you do purchase from the tree sale and pick up your trees. Well, I am going to let Tommy take over here, and he is going to share some information about the tree sale.
All right, and you'll probably have to close the poll on your own screen. I don't think it automatically goes away. So if you're waiting on me or Carrie to make it go away on your own screen, you'll probably have to do that yourself. So yeah, regarding the tree itself, tree sale itself, it's now underway. Carrie's provided a screenshot of Licking Soil and Water's website, and the reason is we partner with Licking Soil and Water, and they are hosting the online order form. So if you want to order online, pay with a credit card, you're still able to pick up your trees at Fairfield County. There's a place on the order form when you go through, when you're checking out, that says what county are you from, where do you want to pick up your trees. You can select Fairfield County or wherever. If you're closer to Newark where their office is and you want to pick them up there, then select that location. But you can order online through them. There is a paper order form. Carrie, I think that's your next slide. So this is what the paper order form looks like that we have at the office. If you're on our mailing list, this should have been included with the latest newsletter that I believe was mailed out this week. I don't know if they've arrived yet or not, but when they do get there, this should be included in that. You can fill out this form, pay with check or cash at our office. We unfortunately cannot accept walk-in credit card purchases here at our office. So if you want to use a credit card, you're going to have to do the online route. One change this year that I'll highlight first is kind of statewide changes for Soil and Waters. We now are required to collect sales tax on all sales. So if you bought trees from us in the past, the price that you saw on the order form was the price you paid. You will have to pay sales tax. We'll calculate that in office if you're paying with a paper form and check or cash. If you're paying online, that'll be calculated as part of the sale. Worth noting, if you're a Fairfield County resident and you order online, you're going to be paying Licking County sales tax, which is 0.5% higher, just because that's where the sale is being rung up at the Licking office. If you come in to the office and pay with cash or check, it's going to be the 6 3/4% that Fairfield County is. So just, it's not a huge amount again, but and if you're used to buying everything, there's sales tax included. But if you bought from us in the past and you're not used to paying that sales tax, it will be added on to the final cost. If you look at this form, The deadline for in-office orders at Fairfield County with the paper document is Monday, March 14th. The deadline for online orders is Monday, March 21st. That week difference gives Chris in our office and our office staff time to process those orders, get those paper orders submitted to Licking County. But Licking will be accepting online orders through March 21st. Another thing, if you're a first-time participant, if you're looking to buy trees from the sale this year and you haven't done so in the past, they are on a first-come, first-served limited quantity basis. So the trees are ordered ahead of time by Licking Soil and Water, and they have a set amount of each tree species. So if you get your order in tomorrow, you're much more likely to get your trees that you want. If you wait to that last day, they may have sold out of some of them. So just keep that in mind. The sooner you get your order in, the better. You're obviously not going to be charged for trees that are out of stock. But if your heart is set on that Kentucky coffee tree like Carrie, it's best to get that order in as quickly as possible. And you can do multiple orders. So if you're still making up your mind on the other ones, but you know for a fact that you want a 5-pack of Kentucky coffee tree, I advise you to get that order in right now, and then you can always place another order or two down the road. The last thing I'll mention, if you order online, there are options on there for a rain barrel and geotextile fabric, the ground cloth. That is not available for Fairfield County pickup. So if you want to pick it up at Licking, those are large bulky items that we just can't transport down here. So if you want to order those, you're just going to have to set your pickup location for Licking Soil and Water and pick it up at their office. We won't be bringing those back down here, but everything else, I believe, is the same online as it is on the paper form. Don't think the pickup date, Friday, April 22nd. Again, that's going to be done in person, whether you go to Licking, whether you're done here. We don't do delivery. Delivery is not an option, unfortunately. That will be the first day you're available to pick them up. If you're going to be out of town, that's fine. We'll keep them here at the office, for an extended period of time. We'll just probably set them outside where it's cooler in a bucket out in an alcove or something, but you don't have to be there that first day to pick them up if that's a scheduling conflict or whatever. And we are typically open later on that Friday till around 7 p.m. to allow folks to get off work and get a chance to be here. So again, if it has to wait till the following Monday for you to come and get them, that's no problem either, but that would be the earliest day that you could get them. Carrie, I think that pretty much covers the basics of it. The order form there, you can see what your quantities and costs are. I don't need to go through all that.
Okay. Thank you, Tommy.
Yep.
All right, just a couple more slides. These are some helpful resources. When I send out the PDF, these will all be live links. So you'll be able to visit these, but just some good stuff to look at. This is where I got a lot of my information. There's a link there to a piece of literature from South Central Power that gives you some good ideas about planting the right tree in the right place. Of course, this has to do with power lines. Those are just some different things to look at. And 3 events that we have coming up with OSU Extension. This is the one I mentioned earlier. This is our maple syrup production series. So this is for the hobbyist. This is for somebody that maybe just has a few maple trees and you want to try tapping them this year. I'm one of those people. I bought a kit and I'm going to give it a try for the first time this year. So we have we've invited some experts. We're going to start with a Zoom session on February 16th from 6 to 8, similar to what we did tonight. And then we're going to follow it up with an in-person session on February 26th in Granville, Ohio. This is something that I've collaborated with the Licking County Extension Educator on. And he, at Warner's Pure Maple Syrup, Bob Warner has agreed to give us a tour of his sugar shack and his operation. So it should be a really great time, lots of great information. This is an annual event that's gone on for quite a while. Hugus Fruit Farm host a hands-on fruit tree pruning workshop every March. It will be cold. It always is. So bundle up. We're outside for the entire time from 10 to noon. Ralph Hughes has pruners that he will allow everybody to use. So you'll actually be pruning. It is very much hands-on. If you want to get signed up for this, there is a link there for RSVP, or you can just call the office. So that's coming up in March. And our second March program is on nuisance wildlife. We're teaming up with Schultz Valley Farm on this one. We're going to talk about how to deter nuisance wildlife and how you can prevent it, how you can keep it out of your yard. Tommy Springer's going to be there. He's going to talk a lot about different licenses and laws and all that good stuff. This will also be an outdoor program. It'll probably be cold also, so make sure that you dress for the weather.